Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
After my best friend got promoted to senior software developer at some tech company, I wanted to treat her to a fancy dinner to celebrate. She'd been working incredibly hard for the past 2 years, pulling late nights and weekends to prove herself in a male-dominated field. When she called me crying with joy about the promotion, I immediately started researching the best restaurants in our area. I found this supposedly amazing French restaurant that had great reviews online. The photos looked fantastic, and while the prices were steep, I figured it would be worth it for such a special occasion. I made a reservation for 7 p.m. on a Friday. I arrived at 6:45 p.m. wanting to make sure everything was perfect. The restaurant had this pretentious atmosphere with dim lighting and classical music playing softly in the background. When I approached the host stand, the manager was there looking down her nose at me. The manager asked if I had a reservation, and I confirmed it was for 7 p.m. She then questioned where the rest of my party was. I explained that my friend was on her way and had just texted that she was parking. The manager then coldly told me that they couldn't seat incomplete parties. When I protested, pointing out that I had a reservation and my friend would be there in literally 5 minutes, she simply repeated that those were their rules and I would have to wait in the lobby. I was already annoyed, but I took a seat in their tiny lobby area. My friend arrived at 7:02 p.m., apologizing profusely about traffic. We were finally seated, but then the real nightmare began. We sat there for 30 minutes without seeing a single server. Other tables around us were getting service, but we might as well have been invisible. I tried making eye contact with various staff members, but they all seemed to be deliberately avoiding our section. Finally, the manager herself came over, wearing this fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. She commented about noticing we hadn't been served yet and asked what we wanted to drink. My friend ordered a glass of wine and I got a cocktail. It took another 15 minutes for those drinks to arrive. The entire meal went on like this. Long waits between courses, cold food, empty water glasses. What should have been a celebratory dinner turned into a 3-hour ordeal of frustration. When the bill finally came, I looked it over carefully. The food had been mediocre at best and the service was absolutely terrible. I decided to leave a 10% tip, which I thought was generous considering the circumstances. When we were walking out, the manager chased after us into the parking lot. She confronted me about the tip, pointing out that I had only left 10% and lecturing me about how the standard for good service was 15% or higher. When I simply stated that it wasn't good service, she snapped back telling me not to bother coming back. I replied that wouldn't be a problem, pointing out that there were literally 60 other French restaurants in the neighborhood and they weren't special. But then I remembered something important. My friend's new company actually does a lot of business dinners in this area. I turned back to the manager and told her that I worked in restaurant compliance for the city and that I noticed some concerning practices during our visit. I told her that we would probably be scheduling an inspection soon and wished her a good evening. The manager's face went pale. I don't actually work in restaurant compliance, but the look of panic on her face was worth the little white lie. As we walked away, my friend and I could hear her frantically calling someone on her phone. Later that night, I posted detailed reviews on every platform I could find, describing our experience and warning others about the terrible service and management's inappropriate behavior. Within a week, I noticed their rating had dropped significantly, and several other reviewers had shared similar experiences. 3 months later, I was walking past a restaurant and saw an "under new management" sign in the window. Turns out the manager had been skimming tips from the undocumented workers she employed, and someone, not me, had indeed reported her to the authorities. I've been a train conductor for 15 years, and I've seen my fair share of concerning situations on the tracks. People trying to race the train at crossings, teenagers taking selfies on the rails, even the occasional broken down vehicle. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened last Tuesday. I was operating the 3:45 p.m. freight train on my usual route. The weather was clear, visibility was perfect, and everything was going smoothly until I approached the crossing near Pine Street. That's when I noticed a black SUV parked directly on the tracks, and my heart nearly stopped. I immediately hit the emergency brakes, but anyone who knows anything about trains knows they don't just stop on a dime. A fully loaded freight train traveling at normal speed needs at least a mile to come to a complete stop. I started blasting the horn repeatedly, expecting the vehicle to move, but it just sat there. When I got closer, I could see someone standing next to the SUV, holding up their phone like they were recording. There were also two small children visible in the back seat. I radioed dispatch immediately, telling them about the emergency at the Pine Street crossing and that there was a vehicle on the tracks with occupants. They responded that they were sending emergency services. When they asked if I could stop in time, I had to tell them no, I was about 3/4 of a mile out, and despite the horn being engaged, the vehicle wasn't moving. That's when my assistant conductor ran back from checking the front windows with more details. He told me there was a woman out there screaming at people, holding up her phone and yelling something. I kept laying on the horn while my assistant conductor used our onboard system to patch into the local police frequency. That's when we heard what was really going on. The woman was screaming that she wouldn't move until she got $100,000. She went on about how her GoFundMe page had been up for weeks and nobody cared about a struggling single mother. She yelled that her children deserved better and threatened that either she got the donations or they would all go together. A police officer on scene tried to reason with her, telling her she needed to move her vehicle immediately and explaining how dangerous and illegal this was. But she refused, saying she had tried everything else and nobody wanted to help them. She insisted her kids needed the money and told them she had the GoFundMe page pulled up right there. She would only move once she saw the donations hit 100,000. I could see the police cars arriving, lights flashing, but the woman wasn't budging. The train was still coming in hot, even with the brakes fully engaged. That's when I saw the fire truck pull up, and what happened next was like something out of an action movie. Two firefighters jumped out with heavy chains, while others rushed to get the kids out of the car. The woman started screaming and trying to block them, but the police grabbed her and pulled her away. In what felt like seconds, they had the chains hooked to her SUV and the fire truck started pulling. The woman continued screaming as they moved her car, yelling about how they couldn't do this because it was her property. She kept shouting about how her children needed the money and that everyone was heartless. She threatened to sue all of them. The fire truck yanked her SUV off the tracks with maybe 20 seconds to spare before my train would have hit it. I've never been so relieved to see anything in my life. When we finally rolled past the crossing, I could see the woman being handcuffed while she continued to scream about lawsuits and her rights. Later, I had to give a statement to the police. That's when I learned the full story. Turns out this woman had been running various scams on social media for months. She'd been claiming one of her kids had special needs to get sympathy donations, but both children were perfectly healthy. She'd already been investigated for fraud after someone reported her previous fundraising attempts. The charges they hit her with were serious: child endangerment, making terrorist threats, interfering with public transportation, fraud, and a bunch of others I can't remember. Child Protective Services took emergency custody of her kids, who turned out to have relatives willing to take them in. Her little stunt went viral, but not in the way she wanted. Someone at the crossing had recorded the whole thing, including her screaming about the GoFundMe while the firefighters saved her kids. The video got millions of views, and people started donating to a fund for the firefighters instead. They used the money to start a program teaching kids about railway safety. She ended up getting 8 years in prison, lost all custody rights to her children, and was ordered to pay massive fines to the railway company and emergency services. Her kids are now living with their aunt and uncle, who by all accounts are loving, stable people who don't use their children as props for social media scams. Sometimes I still think about how close it was that day. If those firefighters hadn't been so quick, if the police hadn't gotten there when they did, but mostly I think about those kids. They're safe now, and that's what matters. I've seen a lot of entitled people in my time, but trying to use your own children as bargaining chips while putting their lives at risk, that's a special kind of evil that I hope I never encounter again. I never really knew my father's side of the family growing up. My parents divorced when I was young, and my dad became distant, eventually moving to another state. I grew up with my mom and younger brother, making the best of what we had. 6 years ago, I decided to reach out to my paternal family through social media. I was in my early 30s, married with 2 kids, and felt it was time to fill that gap in my life. My father had passed away a few years prior, but his siblings welcomed me with what seemed like open arms. The first meeting went well. Lots of catching up, looking at old photos, and sharing stories about my father. They seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, so I planned a second visit, this time bringing my husband and children along. My husband works as an addiction counselor, and he's amazing at what he does. He's helped countless people turn their lives around, which makes me incredibly proud. What I didn't expect was for this family reunion to turn into a nightmare because of my uncle by marriage. We were all sitting in the living room after dinner when someone asked about my husband's work. I proudly explained that he specialized in addiction counseling and had been doing it for over a decade. That's when my uncle started showing his true colors. He scoffed and went on a rant about how it was a waste of time and energy to help addicts. He complained about his tax money being used to treat what he called deadbeats. When my husband tried to explain the importance of rehabilitation, my uncle interrupted with an even more disturbing suggestion. He said that anyone caught with drugs should be taken care of in a different way, with a threatening emphasis that made his meaning clear. The room got quiet. I felt my blood begin to boil, and I reminded him about my little brother who had overdosed just last year at 21. Instead of backing down, my uncle tried to qualify his statement. He suggested that maybe they shouldn't be taken care of the first time, but definitely if they were repeat offenders, citing the old "fool me once" saying. My husband, usually the calm one, spoke up then. His voice was tight with anger as he told my uncle about his sister who had just completed her 6th rehabilitation program and was on track to regain custody of her kids. He asked if my uncle thought it would have been better to take care of her instead. The silence that followed was deafening. My aunt, the uncle's wife, looked mortified. My cousins stared at their feet. Nobody knew what to say until my oldest cousin finally broke the silence. To everyone's surprise, she told my uncle to leave. When he tried to protest, she called him out for his years of hateful comments, emphasizing that he was talking about killing family members. The uncle tried to backtrack, stumbling over his words, but my aunt stood up and agreed with my cousin. She told him to get out. After he stormed out, slamming the door behind him, my aunt broke down in tears and confessed that she was going to file for divorce. She admitted she'd wanted to leave him for years but had been too scared. Hearing him talk about family that way had been the final straw. My aunt followed through with the divorce, and the entire family rallied behind her. The uncle tried to cause problems, but nobody would give him the time of day. He'd shown his true colors, and there was no coming back from that. My husband's sister is now 2 years sober and has full custody of her kids. She sometimes joins us when we visit my paternal family, who have become strong advocates for addiction recovery programs in their community. My aunt even volunteers at a local rehabilitation center, and my uncle kept complaining on social media about how woke culture destroyed his family. Nobody bothered to tell him it was his own hatred that did that. I've been a private bartender for about 5 years now, and I absolutely love what I do. After burning out from the crazy late-night shifts at regular bars, I decided to focus on private events, weddings, corporate gatherings, fancy parties, you name it. The pay is better, the hours are more reasonable, and the clients are generally more professional. Plus, I get to wear nice clothes instead of those tacky bar uniforms with offensive puns plastered across the back. This story happened during a high-end wedding reception. I was working at the Grand Hotel downtown. The bride and groom had splurged on top-shelf everything, including a selection of wines that cost more per bottle than my first car. I was in my usual work attire, crisp black button-up tailored vest, matching tie, and dress pants that actually fit properly. Everything was going smoothly until one of the guests, already a few glasses deep, decided to get creative with their wine glass gestures during an animated story. The glass tipped and about half a bottle of expensive red wine ended up in my ice chest. Now, red wine and ice don't mix well when you're serving drinks unless you want everything to look like a bad punch experiment. I explained the situation to my colleague at the bar, and they covered for me while I made a quick run to the supermarket across the street. I grabbed a cart, loaded up a couple bags of ice, and was heading to checkout when it happened. A man approached me, jiggling a box of candy in my face while pointing at an empty shelf. He asked if I could check the back room for more of that specific candy. Keep in mind that the store employees all wear gray polos and dark jeans. I'm standing there in full bartending attire, complete with a vest and tie. When I asked him if he really thought I worked there, he just gestured at my formal outfit as if I was the one being ridiculous. He insisted that my fancy clothes meant I must be a manager or something. At this point, I could have just said no and walked away, but something in me decided to have a little fun. I told him that we actually did have more in the back, and I'd get some for him. I made sure to tell him to wait right there and not move, as I didn't want to have to look for him later. Then I wheeled my cart around the corner and left. Sometimes I wonder if he's still waiting there, but that's not even the best case of mistaken identity I've experienced. There's this other store I frequently shop at, one of those laid-back places where all the employees wear jeans and Hawaiian shirts. Now, I happen to love Hawaiian shirts, and they make up about 90% of my casual wardrobe. So yeah, I get mistaken for an employee there pretty often, but I usually just laugh it off because I can't really blame people for the confusion. One day, I'm browsing through their snack aisle when I spot this other guy wearing almost the exact same outfit as me. Dark jeans and a blue Hawaiian shirt with palm trees. I couldn't resist commenting on how dangerous it was to wear that outfit while shopping here, explaining how I often get mistaken for an employee in similar clothes. The guy looked down at his outfit, then at mine, and started laughing about how we were dressed like twins. We both got a kick out of it and started sharing stories about how often we get stopped by confused customers. We must have been talking for about 5 minutes when a store manager walked up behind us. The manager, in her most authoritative tone, asked if we needed something to do or if we were just planning to chat all shift. Here she was, thinking she's caught 2 employees slacking off, only to realize we were just customers who happened to be dressed like her staff. The other guy and I couldn't contain our laughter, and the manager's face turned about 3 different shades of red. She immediately started apologizing profusely, explaining that she'd just seen the shirts and made an assumption. The other guy joked about how common this was, and I added that we should probably start a support group for people who can't shop there, wearing Hawaiian shirts anymore. We all had a good laugh about it, and the manager even shared some stories about other times she's made similar mistakes. Turns out it happens way more often than you'd think, especially during tourist season when half the customers are wearing Hawaiian shirts anyway. The funny thing is, after that incident, the same manager always recognizes me when I shop there now. She'll sometimes joke about assigning me a shift since I'm already in uniform. I've started mixing up my wardrobe a bit when I shop there, but honestly, the Hawaiian shirts are just too comfortable to give up completely. Between my bartending gig and my apparent talent for being mistaken for retail staff, I've learned that some people just see what they want to see. Whether I'm in formal wear at a supermarket or casual wear at a beach-themed store, someone's bound to think I work there. At least it makes for some entertaining stories to share at the actual events I bartend. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.